Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thomas Hampson here. It's Tuesday. It must be IDAGIO Live. And yes, it's Tuesday, so it is Song and Beyond on IDAGIO Live, the place where classical music happens. Welcome to the show. We have a little bit of a different format tonight, and I guess this falls under the Beyond idea. We had last June, we had a wonderful discussion with three wonderful colleagues about African American songs, black music. And it was such a wonderful symposia, part of our Hampsong Foundation Art of Democracy series, that we thought, especially celebrating the creativity of African Americans in the African American History Month, that it might make a lot of sense just to play that wonderful discussion again for you. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. I do very much hope you enjoy this. We have Bill Banfield, Dr. Bill Banfield, the most distinguished African American studies scholar and composer himself. Louise Toppin from University of Michigan, Dr. Louise Toppin, also a wonderful specialist in the African American literature and owner and scholar of the extraordinary African American song diaspora website, but she'll tell you all about that. And of course, also Maria Corley was our guest last year, a wonderful young composer, talking about songs and literature. I think you will enjoy this very much, and we will see you, or I will see you. No, you will see me next week, next Tuesday. Enjoy. Thank you. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good day, wherever you might be. My name is Thomas Hampson. You are looking at a very distinguished panel of colleagues, musicians. We are here for the Hampsong Foundation, University of Michigan collaboration on an classic song initiative. And we are specifically here tonight because of a project under that roof called Art of Democracy. My colleague and closest colleague in this project at University of Michigan is Dr. Clague, Mark Allen Clague. Are we going to go by titles? I suppose well, everybody is doctors except me, so we're good. I have several doctors given to me in the cereal box, and I'm very proud of them. But you all earned them. Mark, good episode.
Great to see you, Thomas. I'm here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and just thrilled to have our second episode in the Art of Democracy series, which represents a new partnership between the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance and Thomas Hampson and the Hampsong Foundation to explore really the power of classic song, of songs set to music, of poetry set to music. In our world. I mean, and I think really what we're getting after is what is the meaning of music in our lives? What is the meaning of art in our lives? How does it learn to be better people? How does it help us communicate who we are? How does it give voice to the voiceless? How does it amplify ideas, put them into a civic discourse that allows us to grow as human beings and grow as a society? And that's really what we're exploring in the Art of Democracy series. We have sort of three framing questions. Thomas, I don't know if you want to recite those for us.
And for exactly what you just said, my passion and why we have such a wonderful collaboration is that there's something quite unique about the arts experience in American culture, in my opinion, in that it is really an accompanying diary of the volatile power of what we call American culture. It's why we had this byline in most of the projects I've done. The history of American culture seen through the eyes of poets and the ears of composers. And so we have some wonderful composers and certainly some great eyes here tonight with us. We have the composer, Maria Thompson Corley. Thank you very much for joining us. We have the indomitable Louise Toppin, who is a close colleague at University of Michigan for everything possible in song. And we have the composer and distinguished host. I mean, I'm going to say so little because what I'd love to do, as I said, is read you guys' biography. But Bill Banfield, it's a pleasure to meet you, at least digitally. You all three are extraordinary. Christy Finn is the managing director of the Hampson Foundation. She is the Wizard of Oz behind this, and we'll soon be launching our PowerPoint or our accompanying plates to go through this. You know, Mark, you wrote the description on the website that we have about this whole initiative is really wonderful and a pithy non-academic language, which I love, that says the project's fundamental argument is that art is a vital tool in the dialogue of ideals for sharing, understanding, debating, negotiating, and changing one's mind. That is at the core of any society striving to form a more perfect union. God bless you for writing that, Mark. That's just beautiful. That is just to the point. That's what we're going to discuss. The questions that we put out last week, if you, and thank you so much. So many people watched our both live and after the fact. And I think it's a good document. I posed 3 rhetorical questions. How did and do works of art directly participate in social and political discourse, especially social change in American democracy? 2, how does art offer a safe space and an unsafe space to explore social and political topics that otherwise are too polarizing? We've been hearing that word a lot lately, to address. And 3rd, what role have the arts played, or in fact, do they play? And this is a big question in today's society, in the lives of diverse Americans. Now, I thought the essential definition of being American was diverse, but funny me. Okay. And can their social or political views change as a result of engaging with art? Mm-hmm. So who wants to jump in on that? I'm just going to point my finger to Bill and say, run.
Well, thank you, sir.
Are these good questions?
Those are the essential questions to art. They always have been, they always will be. Art has never been an art for art's sake. It's always doing things. I love what Mark had outlined in his opening statement, as well as the way you've underlined it, that art comes out of human experience. And one of the things that I say is art is tones organized to tell human stories, which encompasses everything that you and Mark have said. And so we do have to play around a little bit with the artist's intentionality. An artist who decides that they want to paint a beautiful picture, as John Coltrane said, you know, musicians, you know, give a sense of the beauty that they sense in the universe through their music. But all the time, you know, music life is not beautiful. You talk about democracy and the struggle for democracy and equality. These are things that keep coming up, and we're so aware of that, particularly now in the kind of protests that we're seeing. But those protests have been going on ever since people began to be inhumane to someone else. And so the artists have had to, by either choice or by the nature of what pretty. So I think when you talk about art song, you're kind of bringing this together, what the songful or what the artful song does. You can look at it either way, singing about the human condition or how art paints and poems and dances and performs the human condition. And that human condition is beautiful, and sometimes it's a struggle. So I thank you for opening us up with those questions.
You know, thank you. Wonderful. I just want to bounce this. Wonderful lead. Louise, I saw you shaking your head as you wonderfully go on. You come from such a heritage of these essential questions in our society. Your father was an incredible force of nature in the political world and civil rights and Black history. I guess to frame what we're at after tonight, we get the art of democracy. It's wonderful. We're living in a time where we're all re-examining the notion of other, and how unfairly and ridiculous, obscene that notion has been through our whole history. And we need to just get that out on the table and embrace the sins of our past, and so we can move on together. But the point is, this notion of other and this fragmented feeling of trying to dock something into something else into our culture. We do this all the time as artists, and you've spent a whole lifetime studying different music that's tried not to do that. what has that been like for you? Do you get angry?
My emotions span the gamut. Of course, there are times that, a moment like this when I'm reading profound compositions that are trying to document this moment. I had a conversation just last night about some people asking, what's the art going to look like that comes out of this moment? And as I've also thought about what has music that has dealt with protest looked like from the beginning, how we've reached to different generations for inspiration. And even in the music that we're going to talk about today, you'll see poets of a later generation reaching back and identifying because of their anger to an earlier generation and picking up that poetry. One of my favorites, which we're not going to talk about, is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Sympathy, that Florence Price sets. It's a poem by Dunbar talking about his generation and the pain of not being free. And then Price, who is another generation beyond him, is writing about taking that same poem and transforming it to adapt to her time in the 50s. And then you have Maya Angelou taking that text, part of the text, and making it her autobiography. And so it's fascinating to me. But it's also sad in the sense that we're seeing it's looping. It's the feeling some people have now with protests that we've been here before, we're continuing again, and we're going to keep looping until we get this right. And when will that be?
If I can add something, a friend of mine who plays the trumpet wanted to do a virtual collaboration on We Shall Overcome, and he felt this is a white friend, and he felt inspired and he thought it would be something that we would enjoy doing together. And I have to admit, the feelings that came up as I was improvising on that were just profoundly, not just angry, but deeply, deeply sad, because why should we still be overcoming now? Do you know what I mean? Like when people say someday, when is someday? Someday, can it just be today? You know what I mean? So I understand what you mean.
Exactly, and I said this just an hour ago. I get very emotional as well, guys. This is America. Where is a Lyndon B. Johnson today, who stands up in front of that group of deeply invested personal people called our Congress and say, we shall overcome? How many times does somebody have to say, where is something going to happen? Well, good, let's not get despondent. Are we agreed that we perhaps are in a potential tipping point?
I hope so.
Do we want to feel good about this?
I'm sorry?
Do we want to feel good about this? Is there a good,
Well, I want to respond a little bit to what Maria says and answer you at the same time. That we went through a period that it was changed from we shall overcome to we have overcome. And we've come back. I remember being in a period in my life that people no longer wanted to sing we shall after the civil rights, and they sang we have. And so to hear that song have that transformation and go back to we shall is quite painful. I'm hoping this is a tipping point because there are some real things that seem to be coming out of it, some real legislation, but we have to see where this is all going to, how it's going to shake out in the end.
Mark?
I mean, I hope we're at a tipping point as well, but I think there's a long way to go. I was just, one of the songs, the recent thing that I've reading about is Quaker Oats, reconsidering its brand Aunt Jemima pancake mix, right? Which is an old song, right? I mean, that's a minstrel tune from the 1880s and early 90s. And it's been so deeply buried, that history in our culture, and people don't really understand it, that they saw it as a positive thing to buy a product in a grocery store that was trading upon the idea of a house slave, right? That was trading upon a servant to a white family who was providing care and comfort to whites, right? But there was no care and comfort going the other direction. And so there is hope, I think, that some of this is starting to change, but I don't think this is a time to take our eye off the prize, right? I mean, this is a time to push ahead. I feel like there's been an earthquake, and there's a chance for these tectonic plates that have locked us into these sort of just harmful patterns of thinking. But we all have to push, and and particularly people like me. I mean, people have to move ahead. I mean, at the university, to really create opportunities to let other voices through. And this is, I think, is the beauty of song. And I noticed that Christy, hopefully put Bill's Hold On up in front of us here on our screen. And I think it'd be a great time to listen to some music and to see what Bill has to say sonically, and also what Hold On can tell us about where we're going and where we've been.
Let's listen. Let's have some music. Hold on. Talk to us, Bill.
Yeah, I think it hits on what you all, Mark certainly has said, and all of you have talked about. I mean, hold on. I love one of the lines there. It says, you can't plow straight ahead and keep looking back. You got to look forward, and you got to hold on to that gospel. And they talk about it, the old spirituals would use biblical imagery. And in this case, it's not biblical imagery at all. It's actually slave and sharecropping in imagery. So you hold on to that plow because the plow is being pulled by a horse. You can't look back or you fall. You got to hold that plow and steer it and hold on and keep going forward. That is, I think, such a powerful, and I'm sure that in my mind when I wrote this, that it was those kinds of themes that compelled me and inspired me and propelled me to write this. And then you notice that cello line. I promised my colleagues that I wouldn't talk all over the board today. I would stay on the gospel plow being a composer. So let's talk about the instrumentation. And the singer has to stay on that vamp. Now, if you listen to this spiritual, which has been done many, many times, it's very slow. Nora, Nora, lets me come in. I'm not singing, by the way. It's usually a very plaintive setting. But in my setting, I wanted the idea of actionality and action and advocacy, emotion. And if you hold on, you won't trip and fall. So I think that's a theme that I think Louise and Maria talked about, all of you all talked about, we should keep on, but it's a little disappointing to have to keep on restarting that restart button about democracy and equality in a democratic nation that's supposed to be bound by those principles. And yet you're right, we don't have the kind of leadership we see. We have it in states, but we don't have it in the overall thing that we need to have to make that very necessary and needed idea of equality plain for all Americans to see, and that to be legislated in the land that we live in. So I think that the last thing I want to say about that piece is just that you have these two tenor voices, the tenor voice of the cello and the tenor voice of the human, having this engagement about how we're to hold on in life. And I think that speaks universally.
Can I just add as an response to something that Mark said, or a piece of that, is that the whole Aunt Jemima piece, which is relating to what Bill just said as well, the company actually revised their image in 1989, which is when Bill and I were here at Michigan as doctoral students. And you wrote this piece, I believe, at that same era, correct? So
That's right.
we were looking and thinking at all these pieces of what it meant for Aunt Jemima to have that first transformation rather than having the step of which they're trying to do now, which is completely abolish it. That's a completely different thought to take it from a modest reimagination to, is this product completely gone? And that's why this moment also can feel different if they actually take that step.
Well, Bill, you said something. You said something earlier about that made me think. I mean, in just what you said, Louise, are we seeing a lot of baby with the bathwater going out the window? I mean, you know, there's some part of our national heritage that we just have to live with and know, and trying to erase it as if it never happened. That's not exactly the answer either, is it?
Well, I think and that argument sort of goes into the idea of having these statues, which were not put up after the Confederacy, but were put up much later as signifiers that Black people shouldn't get too comfortable, shall we say. So I think that, I don't think it's easy to completely erase history, and that's, you know, but these signifiers and these symbols, I think their time comes and it reflects the society of that time. And I think it's perfectly fine to say we move on. The thing I use is that, you know, you don't see statues of, I don't know, anybody in the Nazi era in Germany. And there are other places where those things, we would be appalled if people had these sorts of signifiers of what used to be. There are museums for that. And I think the Smithsonian Museum of African American History covers a wide variety of things. So I don't think we need to see them on our grocery shelves anymore.
Maria, you and Bill have both used words that I think are pretty fundamental to composing. And Bill used the first, intentionality, which is just rings off my head. And you use, I don't know if you know this, but in our conversation before, you very often use the word signifier or signifying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, when you use that word, am I correct in assuming there's a certain amount of musical elements that you're embracing that are signifying something that you're trying to say in the intentional will to say that? Does that make sense?
I do a lot of that. Now, I will add, briefly as possible, that I don't feel that as a Black person that I need to make sure that something sounds jazzy enough or funky enough or, you know, have this, it's Black enough. I mean, I am Black and I'm going to be Black all day, every day. So, you know, whatever I feel like including, whether it has a clear, you know, I don't want to be that self-conscious about it. I don't want my music to have to feel Black enough in that way. But I do feel that, you know, all of these things that perhaps were initially thought as something other than art music, that have been incorporated and will continue to be incorporated and should be incorporated, you know, are equally valid. And I think that's what kind of we're trying to get to, is this idea that how we want to be is equally valid, and it doesn't have to be performance art for anybody in the sense of conforming to a particular white dictate or a particular Black dictate. It's, you know, in the ability to embrace who we are, all the things that have influenced us, and put it out there and have it seen as acceptable, regardless of some other external standard that we shouldn't have to embrace, if that made sense. I think I got more convoluted as it went along.
It does make sense. And the other side of that is nobody faults the French for saying they're French.
Sure, absolutely.
Nobody faults the Germans for pointing out their Germanness. Nobody faults Jewish people for pointing out their Jewishness. Culture is a very, very important piece of who a people are. So yeah. I think that artists have always dealt with that. The signifiers you're talking about, the intentionality that you talk about, could be intentional to put your cultural face or voice or signifier out there. It could just come out of your experience. But I do think the other side of that coin is that the artist, when you look at the kind of arguments that the younger generation were making during the Harlem Renaissance, the younger Black artists were saying, like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, we're saying to the older generation, we Black and we know it and we're proud of it, and we want to put that out there. All you gotta do is rate some links and hues, and you'll get, as we all have, you'll get his argument. So this is a very interesting thing that we have to deal with. And I think when we talk about art song, you know, it was great when the Europeans said we have one language and it's called classical music. But that language, you could hear, you know, Bach studying Italian music. You know, he wanted to get that flavor. And the Germans wanted to know this, and the French wanted to know this, and the Irish wanted to know this. So I would just like to throw out there that cultural voice, that recognized flavor in that garden of there's a rose and there's a petunia and there's a garlic plant is very, very important, because I want to smell the difference between garlic and roses. So in culture, we do that. And what Maria brings up is very important. And it's a decision that you make when you go, being a Black, African-American composer, or a woman composer, or a Spanish composer, when you want people to hear your art, sometimes you have to make that balance. Do I want them to hear my art as a human, or do I care about the qualities of my characteristics of my ethnicity or my political view? These are questions that come up for the artist all the time.
Well, I think
If I may, I'll give you to listen, just to where I was actually also going with it was the whole notion of classical music, because it always gets this rap of the elitism and the manufactured this and whatever else, when in fact, for we musicians, we see it as such a fundamental narrative of any particular culture or epoch. I love what you just said about culture, Bill, but in fact, what I love is to have composers talking to general public who is certainly listening and saying that these music elements are signifying this that I want to say in an intentional way. And then we're at the crux of what classical music is actually the structure of, which is a very clear evidence of values in any particular society or in particular people. And the prisms through which we look at that become the different culture, the different language, the different epochs. But this specificity, and I think that's what a lot of our public gets hung up sometimes in the classical idiom in general. It's just too much work because, oh, I don't get it, wasn't meant this and all that. But it's really just a love of the specific use of something to ignite either reaction or imagination. So it's a bigger conversation that we've already started here. Chris, you've got our next thing. I'm sorry, Louise, you wanted to add to this, please.
Well, actually, I was going to say that I felt that what he just said, and Maria both, that they're leading us into Harry Burleigh, who has so many dimensions as a composer that he has at the beginning of his career, where he's writing in a European art song style that by non-African American composers, poets. He's intentionally not trying to look or identify as an African American composer. He writes Pa Chanel in 1915, and his art song output is 1901 to 1920s is when he's really writing his art song. And Passional is in 1915 to the words of James Weldon Johnson. That's the first time we see him write to a Black composer. And then he writes in the same year, Ethiopia Salutes the Colors, which I know you like, particularly Thomas, in 1915, which again, it mentions a Black woman and a Union soldier in the same piece. And it gets a chance to hear her experience. And then the next time he shows himself as a Black composer is 1917 to the late 1920s. He's doing spiritual arrangements. That's when he begins that whole output that clearly identifies him as an African American, but he starts his tradition of arranged spirituals. And then all the way at the end of his career, 1935, he writes one piece to the poetry of James Langston Hughes. And that's the one that is in front of us. This is his only piece by Hughes, and it is very late, as you can see in his life. He doesn't write again after 1935 for voice.
Was Harry Burleigh, was he at all involved with I call him Du Bois, but Du Bois, and the birthing of the NAACP, and was he a part of any of these social movements? Do you know?
Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, you could not be, you had to be a part of these movements.
Right.
You're talking about Paul Robeson, come on. You're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. Yeah. He's a New Yorker. He lives in New York.
I I was
Oh,
going to say.
he definitely he knew Marcus Garvey's black nationalist movements. He knew the NAACP. He knew the Urban League. They were all in New York and Harlem, and these folks were touting and shopping those perspectives. So he was aware.
I was going to say I didn't know his level of involvement, but
Yeah,
certainly.
that's what I was just wondering. Yeah, I agree, Bill. Let's have a listen. This is wonderful. It's a wonderful song.
Lovely dark and lonely one, bear your bosom to the golden sun. Do not be afraid of light, you who are a child of light. Open wide your arms to life. Whirl in the wind of pain and strife. Face the wall with dark closed gates. People's tireless hands and lovely dark and lonely one, bear your bosom to the sun.
Beautiful.
Gorgeous song. And I always like for people to know that African American song doesn't start with Burleigh. It's much earlier, but he's credited as being sort of the beginning of a movement.
Right. And by the way, once again, to when we say art song, we're talking about the phenomenon of classic song. So a classic song initiative, we're all trying to turn the dial a little bit to simply understanding that the phenomenon we're talking about is an existing poem that doesn't need a bit of music, and music that is probably inspired because of the inherent emotional impact or imagination of that poem, and doesn't necessarily need words. But the two of them together, and it's a rather unique phenomenon in the world of art, create a standalone third form called an art song or a classic song. So we're talking about, your drill down is through the text and your drill down is through the musical elements. It's quite a phenomenon, quite fascinating. Anyway, I thought I'd just throw some clarity. Herr Professor Clague, would you like to jump in here somewhere?
Yeah, Burleigh, I think, is an amazing artist. He did, just a little point, he was actually given the Spingarn award by the NAACP in 1917. So he's definitely connected in the creation of this really whole tradition of the concert spiritual that, as Bill mentioned, the Robeson and Marian Anderson and other amazing singers took up. I mean, in some ways, he created that tradition that became part of really like all art song recitals in the 20s and 30s. But I think one of the really interesting things about Burleigh is that he was friends with and connected to Antonin Dvorak, who came to the United States in 1892. Burleigh had a scholarship to go to the National Conservatory, which is was really dedicated to founding an American tradition. And one of the moments of hope that we sort of missed, I think, as in music, was this moment to bring the African American tradition into the sort of heart of American music generally. And this was Dvorak really, I think, because he didn't have the racism that so many people in the United States did. When he came to this country, the interesting music that he heard, the distinctive music that made American music sound special and unique, was what he called Negro melody and then Native American music. And, Native American music has really, there's a whole political tragedy around that, the reservation system of sort of the shrinking and literally the cordoning off of that people. But you know, Black music has really survived and thrived in the popular sphere. I mean, coming off of the sort of dance music of the 1920s and the jazz tradition, and you know, into popular music today, where you can't really think of rock and roll or rap without recognizing the African American tradition. In classical music, we have a lot of work to do to recover this history, to amplify these voices, which have been there and have been powerful, but that we have sort of through our institutions marginalized and pushed off to the side. So the kind of work that Louise is doing, the kind of music that Bill and Maria are bringing to the fore, I think is something that's really vital to our tradition. And if classical music is going to thrive and be part of the solution, it's those voices that need to be amplified.
I
Voice,
just,
please.
you know, it's difficult not to be silent with all these brilliant opinions and insights. I want to continue, as we all have, I love signifying. Maria's talking about it. There's a signifying monkey, signifiers, and I love how this Harry Burleigh piece, which is art, makes the word lovely and dark. You see, Black folks hadn't heard of themselves as being dark and lovely, because we have a tradition where everything was a minstrel image, where dark was ugly. That's why, Langston Hughes says, we're ugly and we're beautiful too. It was recognizing all of these symbols in language. But I love that you talk, Mark, about Burleigh in this situation, because he said he would not come to America unless he had 1/3 Native American students, 1/3 African American students, and 1/3 of the other everybody else. So here you have an elevation of the ethnic idea of what America is again, and he comes there to teach that. I think that that's so very, very powerful for setting an example of what truly is American. It's all of us together, and I think that this is a great beginning. So glad that you started with Harry Burleigh with the art song, because that's truly really quite points the way for everybody.
Great. We've got a plate up here of Adolphus Hailstork, who, until I knew about you, Louise, I did not know.
Yes.
Imagine. Tell us his story.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about this piece, but Adolphus Hailstork was born in 1941 and is probably one of the most important symphonic composers of African-American descent we have today. He's well recorded in terms of that repertoire, but he also has a large output of songs, 59 just for soprano, which is what I've been working on. And I wanted to bring this piece into the conversation because in 1992, a teacher, Maria Thompson at Hampton, commissioned this cycle, a commemorative set of songs for the anniversary of the famous Charles White mural located at the school called The Contribution of the Negro to American Democracy. This was in 1943. And so this piece is to the text of Martin Luther King. So again, even though Adolphus is a composer who, at Dunbar, and then at this one set to the words of Martin Luther King, many the text of which I think fits today's situation. This mural had figures such as Harriet Tubman, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Crispus Attucks, and it highlighted the community's struggle for equality in all facets of life. White was painting at a time when Black representations were non-existent in art. So it was premiered by Thompson in 1992, and the pianist is also a composer, Roland Carter. So,
Let's have a listen. Should we have a listen?
Difficult
So you're hearing the two parts of the piece. The first part that shows the anger and the frustration of the bombing and killing. And then you hear Martin Luther King's response. This is from 1961, in which he's saying the response, and the answer is that love is stronger than liking. And that love was going to be the solution to these difficult times.
Well, it reminds me of the fourth song with the four Brahms' last serious songs, you know. And all the major composers, you know, Mahler, what's the essence of life? Oh, compassion, love. My goodness, what a piece of music, fantastic. No, he's been a real. I'm confessing all the time about this. I mean, my sphere is rather large, I suppose. I don't mean to justify myself, but I just didn't know Mr. Hailstork's music, and yeah, the symphonic music is just fantastic, you know. But it was just. The point is also, speaking from the white side of here, I guess, as well, is the point is, I don't think you should have to sit there and go, oh, wow, that's really great, that black composer. It's just great music. It's like Eleanor Rummick Warren, you know, the epitome of a white woman composer, dying at the age of 92, giving an interview at the age of 89, saying, there is no gender in music, gentlemen. It's music, you know, move on here, get it together, listen, and open your minds and hearts. And I've written this about African-American song music, specifically to the Song Alliance, the African-American Song Alliance, as well as recording Margaret Bond's things. Until we simply talk about American song and marvel at its myriad roots and origins, and whatever that conversation can be, but it is American song. Langston Hughes is my American poet, just like Whitman, you know? Stop it. I mean, I'm just, you know, at some point, civil rights has to be a bigger picture than women's rights, and the gay rights, and the black rights, and the brown rights, and all that. We've just gotten so fragmented that it feels like we're just losing the joy of being what the birth of this amazing nation was to begin with. I'm sorry, I tend to tirades every once in a while. Miss Corley, you have been quiet, and you have something to say.
Well, I mean, that's the ideal. I mean, that is the ideal. I think, unfortunately, the reason that all these groups have had to raise their voices is because the ideal has not been lived up to. And if you look back to when the nation was actually founded, these same people in the founding of America didn't have a voice. So the ideals that perhaps are espoused there should be an asterisk that they were really assumed to only apply to the people in the room who were white males. But I agree with you that at some point, and that is my dream, you know, is that at some point, somewhere way in the future, yes, we just say, okay, this is great music, this is great whatever, and we don't think about, you know, we have to put it in a little category of, okay, well, we want to promote this kind of composer, so we're going to have a slot for women and a slot for Asians and a slot for African Americans, or, you know, so I understand where you're coming from, but I think that built into America is this idea that if you don't say anything, the status quo remains, and these people who didn't have voices, including people like me, Black woman, would still not have.
And going to that point, can we talk about American artists and performers? I mean, I sang some songs of William Grant Still on my American cycle several years ago, and I had a couple of gentlemen in Detroit come up of color and say, you know, do you sing spirituals? And I said, I'm deeply moved that you'd even asked me that question. He said, oh no, you understand where the music elements come. They were incredibly nice and so forth. I said, I as a white man, I'm kind of careful about that. I'm not sure it's my right. So my point is not me. My point is not even where still. My question is all of this repertoire on all sides of the fence open for everybody and all artists because it's more important to be heard than who's actually singing it? Or is there a part of the African American canon that should very well be only sung by African Americans? Hugely loaded question, forgive me, but.
I think it depends on the words. But I understand, because I was looking at, I was thinking about that because I noticed that one of our slides, which I don't know if we'll get to, was you singing Margaret Bonds. And, I think that on the one hand, women have been singing songs with texts that were from the point of view of a man for many years in like Nell, and women sing Nell and men sing Nell. The implication wasn't that these were, queer women, just women singing a beautiful song, and no one thought much about that. So that is kind of a big question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think it really depends on the words, but you are inhabiting somebody's world when you sing the songs. You're not just singing songs that are about you. So I don't know, someone else jump in, please.
Well, I'd like to add that there was a period when many singers such as of your stature, Thomas, were singing spirituals. Hall Johnson regularly collaborated with, I think, John McCormick. And so he was singing spirituals and all sorts
Larry
of...
Tibbett? Lawrence Tibbett?
Lawrence Tibbett, yes, exactly. So it's somehow in our time, we've gotten away with it. I remember when Debbie Voigt did an all spiritual CD, and there were so many conversations about her doing it, but that's a part of what I'm doing in teaching the class. I think it's giving a context so that as students begin to experience this music, they're taking ownership and understanding. You're not appropriating. I'm not trying to get you to say that you own this music. Nobody owns the music, but I want you to understand it and have a cultural context for singing it, so that anytime you sing it, you put it in a context, especially if it is racially charged.
Right. Well said. Well said. Bill, I see I can just feel it. I can see it and feel it.
We those of us that teach in the area of popular music as well, I teach the history of American music, from Woody Guthrie to Bernstein to, talking about the sharing. The two terms that come up is misappropriation and ripping off, and cultural respect. And when you talk about popular music, like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones were very clear about articulating this is Black music. They would give that, and then they would enjoy the mood. You think about blues today, you go to a blues band, it's usually an all-white band, and they're getting down on the quintessential American mother tongue of all popular music is the blues. That is a music that comes directly out of Black experience. It sings about the existential I, dealing with the you and the problems of that, but the joy in jumping over that. But that human leap of using the music or the song to leap over your tribulation to get to triumph is something that everybody can embrace. And I think that's what happens when different cultures use the music or sing music of other cultures or other identities, is that they are participating in the humanness of that song. And so I think you're right. I think that's okay, as long as Maria is saying, you're recognizing some of that. And I mean, if you sang a song, I Am the Darker Brother, and you were on stage, I would say, well, he's with us. You know what I'm saying? That would be how I would read that. Hey, he gets it, so I don't think it would be, misappropriated. I just think you're right. It has to be the spirit of how the music is shared.
Mark, have you ever had a student come to you and say, with some controversial text or background of music, and say, can I sing this? Is it okay if I learn this? Have you had that experience?
I haven't had that so much in my classes. I mean, I think, one of the things I have had, these points about the importance of marrying history to the art, I think is essential. I mean, you can't have the content without the context. And I teach a whole unit on minstrelsy in my overview of American music course. And it's surprising to me, what percentage, and it's probably a third or more of my students have never heard of this tradition.
They don't know anything
They've
about
heard
it.
about blackface. They've heard it in the news. They understood there was some controversy. They don't know where it's come from. And I think it's impossible for us to understand and navigate our present if we don't understand that past. I mean, I totally agree with Maria. We need to turn the page on Aunt Jemima, and we don't need to put these in the town square in a statue. But it definitely has to be a part of our history that we know, because we can't understand who we are unless we know where we were. But I would love to hear some of Maria's music and just sort of invite her to.
Yeah, Maria, I would love. Can we hear this and talk about the Big Yellow Taxi?
Okay. First of all, I was raised in Canada. I've lived in the United States for more and more of the majority of my life. So Big Yellow Taxi refers to a song by Joni Mitchell. And the line in it is, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone." And so as Notre Dame was burning, I'll read the poem and then I'll try to explain it a little bit. The world paused as Notre Dame burned, mourning its grandeur, crumbling like shards of spun glass, forgetting the toppled spires pointed towards a god they had long ago dismissed. Parisians and tourists stood in solemn worship of stone and ancient wood. Our Lady, monument to white male creativity, though neither, her damaged beauty left me bereft as they. My cathedral burns like candle wax, each new ache and wrinkle an inevitable shortening of the wick, while my fragrance wafts and dissipates. Democracy had no assumed expiration. Lit by careless matches, ancient timbers and lofty towers fall to ash behind a facade of stone. I set part of that. And in the end, I took out the section about Our Lady and the monument to white male creativity. And I'll explain that. Like, on the one hand, my initial reaction was we wouldn't all be so concerned about, we'd still be concerned, but my thought was like if a bunch of Benin bronzes had been melted down somehow, or even when ISIS bombed Persian antiquities that were wonders of the world, the amount of attention that it got, or the staying power in the news, was somewhat less. Now, there were other circumstances which I won't get into because that would take longer. But anyway, I just found when I set the song quite recently, I changed it to My Heart Pause because it occurred to me that maybe the whole world, there are lots of places in the world that probably didn't stop because Notre Dame was burning, and that not everybody has dismissed God. So I changed a few things. But the main thing was that the idea of Parisians and tourists standing in solemn worship of this edifice as things were burning and falling in. And so the transition to the idea of my body, well, everybody is supposed to decline and fade away, but democracy wasn't supposed to. And yet here we are watching things like, people being above the law, de facto above the law, even though we're maybe not, we're kind of saying it, but we're kind of also watching it happen before our eyes. And so these things are falling, and there you see the facade of democracy, and then these things are still happening behind. So when I set the song, I started with Leonin and Periton because they were Notre Dame, our organum, masters of Notre Dame organum, and it's old European music. And then it's a very dissonant song because things are burning and toppling. And so it's not been performed. It was something I wrote very recently, and I was pleasantly surprised Louise thought she wanted to include it, honestly. But, and as I thought about it further, though, I realized that we, as in people of color, Black people, we're not really invited to this democracy in the first place. Anyway, that's just a little bit about my text and my thoughts as I wrote the text. And when I set the song, I took some of it out for structural reasons, in that I didn't want the front to be so long. The middle with My Cathedral was, a different mood. And then it gets back to the original thought of everything burning down in a more destructive way.
Wow. Are we going to hear some of this or no?
It hasn't been performed yet, so we look
On,
forward
It's
to
very new. So
that.
yeah, so
But
stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen.
I wanted us, I
It's
wanted us to
incredible.
include some contemporary thoughts about democracy.
No,
Oh,
that's very powerful. I'm really reminded of, Bill's comment from the beginning that music is tones organized to tell the human story, and it's getting these voices and these different perspectives, I think, into the conversation that's so powerful. Um, in Maria's work and all of this music, and I think for me one of the important things is, how do we change the soundscape? I mean, how do we have these sounds by Black artists the world over really become part of the concert hall tradition and be heard? And I think there's the research and the voices we're hearing about today, that Louise and Maria and Bill are sharing with us, is something that, and I just feel like a real imperative to commit to putting this music into programs and performing it. My own experience with this, I mean, similar to Thomas, was that my very first job as a musicologist was at the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago. I worked with Samuel Floyd, and I was a young graduate student and was hired to be an editorial assistant on a new encyclopedia project called the International Dictionary of Black Composers. And so I showed up for work the first day. Oh, do you actually have it? There it is. Yeah, absolutely. With the Duke on the cover there, right? And I recognized about 4 names out of the 1,400 names that are in that project, and they were William Grant Still, Florence Price, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong. And those were the names that had been part of my training as a doctor of musicology. Like, I was training to be a professional in the field, and the field told me that I only needed to know those 4 names. And there are literally thousands. We are just touching the surface of this repertory, and it's really attendant upon all of us. And Thomas has really done this work. Louise's database with Videmus is important. Bill's work at the Smithsonian is important. Maria's advocacy as a writer and speaker and host, as well as a composer and pianist. All of this stuff is getting it out here. But I think all the musicians and educators who are on this, we won't change the tradition. I mean, the problem with a canon, the problem with music and its celebration of conserving a tradition, is that until somebody breaks the cycle, the tradition stays the same, right? The teachers teach what their teacher taught them to their students, who teach their students that what they was taught, and the generations go down. I mean, so we need to broaden intentionally our soundscape in order to really correct history. I mean, history has celebrated those things that had institutional power. And so many of these composers were denied publication, they were denied recording, they didn't get a chance. And we need now to fix that problem by very intentionally going back and listening and celebrating this music, because it is emotionally so powerful. I mean, and that's like Ethiopia Sword in the Colors, Thomas's performance of that is just stunning as a work of art. And it's not a piece that very many people know.
Louise, can I ask you, can you want to have I mean, God bless you, Mark, wonderful. We're starting to go into our last round here. Louise, apropos databases and research, I mean, I don't know which hat you want to put on and talk right now, but if you wanted to go to your musicology hat and your database, the diaspora, and all of the wonderful collections, and it's not just collections, it's making the evidence. Oh, yeah, right. Thank you very much. It's making available. I mean, you've been just amazing at here's my footsteps, just walk in those for a while and you'll understand a little bit better.
Right. Thank you. I was going to say that I agree so much with what Mark just said. We have to disrupt the canon. I like to be a little bit more aggressive and say we have to disrupt it. And in disrupting it, what I've spent my time trying to do is come up with resources that will allow us to lose the excuse that we don't know the repertoire, as we're trying to teach the next generation of teachers and scholars who will know this repertoire. But it takes all of us, the lecturing, the teaching, the resources. There's just a lot. There's a lot to do, but there's also a lot of resources now that we didn't have back in the day when I started this in 1990. All of these projects.
I would love to speak to that in this last quarter. because I'm looking at the picture there that you have there of David Baker, and I'm listening to Mark, Louise and I, and all of us were hanging out with Sam Floyd in the Center of Black Music Research in Chicago. And that for us as young scholars in 1988 was the place that not only his work was being, he was doing this work, Samuel Floyd, and having people like Mark there, but all of us were asked to give music to the Center for Black Music Arts scores. And I wrote in that book that Mark talked about, was asked to do, I think I did the article on the Dolphus Elstorg, as a matter of fact. So, you know, we were all asked to contribute. And I'm looking at David Baker there, the book that was in my Carol. David Baker was at Indiana University. We were at University of Michigan. He was, and that book was done in 1968, I think. It was, no, 72, I think. I'll look at the date in a minute. It's called The Black Composer Speaks. There were 12 composers.
70s.
And I called the editor at the time of Scarecrow Press. I said, well, there's a whole generation of us. This was 1988. He said, well, young man, would you like to write the next book? And I love that Louise held up that book, because I will hold up Landscapes in Color, Conversations with Black American Composers, which includes 40 Black American composers. And I did that book in 1990. It stands today. Today is the most quoted. I don't care about all that, but people quote that book because it has the interviews of 40 living Black American composers, men and women, everybody from Adolphus Elstorg to Hal Smith to, you know, contemporary artists like Herbie Hancock. And they were all talking about, their work. Issei Barnwell, Patrice Rushen, who also works she's the head of popular music at USC, but she was trained as a concert music composer and pianist before she became the Patrice Rushen we know, who's not only was a pop jazz star, but then became a TV writer and scorer for movies and what have you. So this multiplicity of stuff is in the lineage of being a Black composer. You think about someone like William Grant Still. They're doing, he's hanging out with W.C. Handy, writing the music for all of these, you know, popular scores, and the Black Swan in their record company, which is a Black record company, which had all these popular artists. So this kind of, as Mark knows and others, and even Louise knows as well, this kind of back and forth between popular and concert music for Black composers is a part of their thing. So when, like you say, when we learn about these people, we learn about a wider range of their works as well, which is really important. So I think that's a very important part of education, is learning what artists actually do. And so if you don't talk about the artist, you don't have the experience of knowing the various kinds of human experiences or disciplines, poetry or dance or whatever. All these artists don't just deal with poetry, they also deal with dance and sculpture, and, you know, so I think it's important to have a discussion about all of this. It's just great.
And were we going to end by listening to having Bill talk about "It's All Good, My Brother"?
Yeah, let's have some more
music. Okay.
Yes.
Distinguished Professor of Music William Brown enjoys sites in Moscow, Russia.
I would imagine that there's some discussion that you'll want about It's All Good, My Brother, the text there. So let's tie it all together, and then I'll let Louise or whoever wants to jump in, and Maria, talk about Art Song. Look, I mean, it's self-consciously, It's All Good, My Brother. That's something that Bill Brown, who's a very distinguished tenor of contemporary music and opera, and you might all know him, Thomas. Bill Brown had this distinctive voice, and he encouraged composers. So he was always at the Center for Black Music Research. He was always doing pieces by David Baker, or always doing pieces by Hale Smith. That was his thing. He was a singer who championed the music of Black composers. And one thing he would always say, it's all good, but Bill Brown would light up the room. He'd come in the room and say, it's all good, my brothers and sisters. That was his line. And so I think Louise, for one of her precious birthdays, asked a number of us to set music, and we decided, a number of us, to celebrate both Louise in this concert, but also the great singer Bill Brown. And I think that connects contemporarily to the idea of it's going to be hold on, it's all good, my brother, and you can take that forward to Kendrick Lamar saying, you know, we're going to be all right. It's this constant using of the music to reaffirm your humanity, that it's just hold on, it's going to be all right. And I do think that that's very universal. The other thing I would say when hearing this is it's self-consciously jazzy, because that's what he liked to do, but also it's art songs. So there's segments of it that sound like a Schumann song, you know, or Schubert song. You know, there's this attempt to merge art music with contemporary, and that's something that Bill Brown did. So I just had to give you a little background on some of the thinking in terms of the process of that piece.
I'd like to add further that the whole thing was this song was a part of a cycle called Aspects of Bill. And what I did is I commissioned 11 composers. Bill died suddenly in 2004 in his early 60s, and he had been my singing partner for 15 years. The two of us were out there singing so many premieres of African-American composers. He's the one that got me involved, particularly on that national circuit doing it. And he had been a trumpeter along with Miles Davis, a jazz trumpeter himself, as well as a trained singer. So he had both careers. And so when I put together these 11 songs, I created a 45-minute song cycle, which I haven't recorded yet. I still keep saying I'm going to do it. And I thought, well, will this work? But every composer decided to talk about Bill and write about him in a different way. Many of them, like Bill, took one of his favorite sayings. Another one took from his answering machine. He used to say things like, if it's called an apartment, why are they stuck together? And he would say that on the answering machine. And he had some good ones. But it was sort of an homage to a colleague and a friend. And yes, Bill's right. It was performed on my birthday, which is also, Bill and I share a birthday the same year. So that's what this was all about, a celebration of a friend as well as a colleague. And I loved it because you didn't hear it, but at the end, Bill makes me scat in addition to speaking. So he's really stretching the vocalism of of singers. And that's what I've enjoyed about the journey with African-American composers, because they have challenged not only what I learned in the traditional classical setting, but I've also learned how to use my voice in ways that represent what these African-American composers are trying to say in unique ways.
Can I add one other thing while Mark is there and you all are talking about U of M? We all went to University of Michigan. I just have to put a plug in there. And Louise sang my first song on the very first Composers Forum, 1988. Louise sang my song, and she blew everybody away. So I've been writing for Louise for 30 years. That's a long time. So I think that the other thing that's a theme here is that musicians work together, whether they're pianists or violinists or composers or musicologists, that our lives are enriched because of the kind of exchanges we do together. I'm just loving that Mark and I just sat on a panel about composers. I'd known of him there, and we sat on a panel of which the composer who won the Pulitzer this year was on that panel too. And it's just wonderful that we
Anthony
all
Davis.
have these kinds of lot. We don't just write about music or perform somewhere. We actually live with each other and create this narrative about how musicians and interested people in the arts do contribute to the ongoing story of what art means in our lives. So I think that's important.
I can say one short thing, which is that, you know, I agree. I mean, Louise has been instrumental in my life in the same way, as far as, you know, commissioning a song cycle for me and being a supporter of my recordings. And it's so true that we, the symbiotic relationship is the way forward. I think, you know, all these different people using their different talents and not just staying in their one lane. We were talking about staying in your lane, staying in different lanes. I have to say I went to Juilliard, so I don't actually know you guys from University of Michigan, so I got to clear that up. But you know, but having been in a completely different atmosphere, you know, it seems like what you had there was a uniquely nurturing environment. I was the only Black pianist at Juilliard for years and years. And so, you know, we were a much smaller community, and the diversity of faculty in the music department was very, very lacking. So it sounds like what you experienced was different. I won't go on too much of a tangent, but I would just want to say that I'm grateful for all the people involved in this production, in, you know, Thomas and Mark and Louise and you and everybody else who is using their voices and making it possible to move forward, you know, not sitting quietly on the sidelines, but helping the plow to move forward, like hitching a horse to the plow. Just standing there with
Hey, full circle. Hold on. You know.
Hold on, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking. We have to reach back. And so far, we had been early on reaching back within our own circle. It's time now to reach out to the fuller circle, which is what you're helping us do, Thomas, as well, is to think it's not just the little circle we knew. How do we get the rest of the community, which is the world, in to understand what this music is about?
I believe with my whole heart that what we're talking about tonight is the evidence and property of every human being, especially in America. And if you don't know that, somebody damn well stole it from you. And it's time to give it back. I believe in empowering, enabling, and embracing. And you guys are amazing. If there's anything I really love, it's giving space for experts to do what they do so that I can just sit back and learn. I love it. You guys are fantastic. Mark, I cherish our friendship and our work together. You three are just wonderful, wonderful composers, wonderful scholars. Christy, you're fantastic. We've run over time, ladies and gentlemen. We'll index this. You can drop your needle if you want to listen to it again. You don't have to sit here for another hour and a half. But just to warn you, this is by no means the last conversation of these people and our initiative, Hampsong and University of Michigan. God bless you all. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Bill.
Cheers.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Louise.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye, Mark. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.